So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here today. My name is Tyler Nuttall. I am the current Georgia Geospatial president. And if you're new to us, new to Georgia Geospatial Association, we are a network of geospatial professionals providing resources to government and private sectors and providing a place for learning and collaborating with each other. And then today you're here part of our monthly lunch and learn. So every month we have a virtual lunch and learn. And then on top of that, we also have lots of in-person events happening throughout the year as well. So I'll highlight some of those. We do have lots of board updates. That's part of the reason why we're having some technical issues because we had some account changes, some new email changes and things, and access change to things. So, but if you ever want to check out who's on the board, please feel free to scan this QR code or go to Georgia Geospatial Association.org. These are some other upcoming events here that I want to highlight really quick. Northeast Georgia, which is going to be in the Athens area, they're having an in-person lunch and learn talking about GIS and archaeology. Joel Logan from Jackson County is giving that presentation. On March 24th, we have the Greater Atlanta lunch and learn that's going to be given by I believe Geosyntech, talking about how AEC firms use GIS, and that's going to be at City of Brookhaven's new City Hall. March 26th, we have the Northwest Georgia's Lunch and Learn at City of Rome. And March 27th, we have the CSRA that's in the Augusta area. They're having their in-person meeting about migrating from ArcMap to Pro. And then on Thursday, April 16th, we have the Middle Georgia Lunch and Learn discussing putting their 3D data first and surveying workflows. And that's going to be in the Macon area. On the horizon, we have more Greater Atlanta happy hours coming and other events, including, I don't think it's on here, but yeah, we do have a drone event coming on April 20th at Kennesaw State University. That's going to be from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. on that Monday. So stay tuned for that. And then again, if you need more updates on our events, please always check out our LinkedIn. That's the best place today. Our website can sometimes be a challenging place to find our events. We're working on that currently as we're going through a website change. So please just check Georgia Geospatial Association's LinkedIn. And then if you have any feedback you want to provide us, please scan this QR code here to submit any feedback. This will take you to Survey 123. If you want to volunteer for the board, we have lots of different roles available for folks to volunteer. So please take the time to scan this QR code with your phone and then leave us some feedback. I'll leave that up for 5 more seconds. Sarah, any luck? Oh, I can't hear you, so you're muted.
I think it should be working. Probably not well. Let me fix some things real quick. I'm at the start over real quick.
And if you want to become a member, here's a QR code to join Georgia Geospatial Association. But with that, I want to go ahead and kick things off by handing it over to our guest speaker today, or guest speakers, I should say. We have Keagan Powers and Alivia Gustrosky. Did I say that correctly? I hope.
But yeah, okay. Well, thanks everybody for being here. I'm excited to be talking to you all today. Hopefully everybody is able to stay awake and didn't get their legs kicked out from under them like I did by the time change. I'm having a little bit, I'm having a bit of trouble staying awake, but that's all right. It happens to us all. Hopefully you've got your caffeinated beverage of choice prepared for this, because it's a bit of a technical demonstration that I'm going to be giving you today, but hopefully it'll be interesting and informative for you. And hopefully you'll bear with me as I sort of learn a new format here. I'm not particularly familiar with Google Meet. So can you all see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So today my presentation is going to be about ArcGIS field maps tasks. So specifically sort of the thing that sort of sounds really easy until you actually try to do it in a real enterprise environment. And that is getting tasks to work with a reference feature service that's backed by an enterprise geodatabase. So if you've ever been kind of in the situation where you're thinking tasks are really cool and it sounds like something that I'd love to integrate with my workflows and what I do with GIS, but you're looking at this and you're just like, our system of record, it lives somewhere else and we publish from an ArcGIS server. But hopefully, if that's you, this should give you an idea of how that process would look in real life. Because for one, Esri documentation makes it look a little bit easier than it actually is. And that's a bit of a spoiler for the main theme of this presentation. But I'll elaborate on that later. And hopefully, even if that's not you, you'll be able to maybe laugh at our expense, because this is a bit of a story of how we got here. So essentially, what I'm going to be going through today is a practical workflow that you can actually repeat across multiple environments. I'm going to explain why it works, and then the gotchas that tend to burn time, in particular our time getting this all wired up. But with that, let's jump right in. So quick introductions. My name is Keagan Powers. I'm a full-time student, and I work as a GIS intern at Cultivate Geospatial Solutions. And I'm in my final semester of an associate's degree in GIS. And I'm very excited to be giving you all this presentation today. So thank you all very much for having me. Also joining me is my coworker, Alivia. He'll be giving a couple of short demonstrations throughout the course of the presentation. Hopefully that should add a bit more context to what I'll be talking about. Alivia, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Muted.
Yep. I don't think we can hear you, Olivia. Okay, so I'll just continue on until we get that sorted out, but maybe we'll come back. We'll come back and have Olivia introduce herself a little later in the presentation. But very quick context on CGS. We're a government and utility sector focused GIS and asset management firm. So we do a lot of enterprise GIS, and we're a leading provider of software products that help organizations harness the full power of their spatial data. So one of the things that we're concerned with is not necessarily can we make this work and just like duct tape it together and ship it out, but can we actually make this a reliable and supportable workflow across multiple actual real clients? So that context matters a lot for what I'm going to be talking about today, because a lot of times those reference services are non-negotiable in those environments. And real quick, Olivia, did you manage to get your microphone working before I move on? So, all right, that's all right. That's all right. We'll see. We'll come back a little later. But hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to explain what field maps tasks are and how they get configured. You'll get sort of a high-level overview of what field maps are. You'll be able to identify the schema requirements for those tasks, the ones that are actually required and not just the ones that Esri says are required, because yes, there is a difference, unfortunately. You'll know how to avoid some of those common pitfalls. You'll understand how the domains, fields, which fields you need, which domains you need, how they need to be wired up, and so on. And then you'll leave with a repeatable workflow that you can use over and over again in any environment. So the roadmap is going to kind of look like high-level field maps overview, high-level tasks overview, hosted versus referenced. What's the difference? How does tasks work in both? The workflow that works, the troubleshooting, the best practices, and those integrations. So just a quick high-level overview of field maps. Field maps is essentially how I would describe it is Esri's all-in-one approach for fieldwork. Now, it doesn't cover literally everything, but it does cover a lot. And a lot of these workflows were previously fragmented across multiple apps, and field maps is sort of Esri's way to bring it all together. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit more in a second. But if you think back to older patterns that some of you may be familiar with, stuff like collector and tracker and bits of other apps, field maps consolidates this all into one experience. But again, there's room for other apps in here, but field maps does take place of a lot of that stuff there. So what you're really designing when you look at field maps is that it's all driven by a web map. So as the map author, you're really designing an experience that's going to run on a phone or tablet. So it's not just configuring an application, you're authoring a web map that is going to drive what people will see in the field. So you're looking at what layers show up, what ends up being editable, how the forms behave, and then whether or not somebody can use it offline. So tasks sit on top of that. So field maps isn't just collect points. It's here's work that needs to be done, and here's how you execute it in a guided way without switching apps. So I want to talk about for a second some of the brief history of Esri's field apps evolution. Mostly just because I personally find it interesting. And also I think that the context of sort of how we got here helps us get the bigger picture of what field work looks like today and what these applications look like today. So here you kind of have a brief overview of the timeline here. And so we'll dive into this first era of field apps, I suppose. And so I'll be totally honest. This is what I'm calling the ArcPad era. These devices predate me by quite a bit. So I can't actually speak to how well they worked for field users. Maybe some of you in the audience have experience with these, and I'd love to hear about that at the end of the presentation. But essentially my understanding based on reading the history and some of the accounts I was able to find on the internet, these are like neat little devices that were used mostly for surveys and inspections at the time. Now, again, this is pre-smartphone field GIS, so they're somewhat limited in the sense that they require a specialized piece of hardware to use. And then from what I understand, they also suffered from a complicated sync process back to the GIS system after the data was actually collected. So useful, good devices, served a phenomenal purpose at the time, but a little clunky and obviously indicative of the environment at the time. So as we move on from that, we kind of start moving into the modern era of field, sort of the first iteration of smartphone apps in the 2010s. As smartphones are becoming prolific across the public, we're starting to see as we build out applications that sort of fit that. So at this point in time, we have several different apps for different field workflows. Some of the major ones are Collector, that allows you to edit and collect GIS features in the field. Survey 123, which totally still exists and is very useful today. I use it myself for collecting data from clients. And then you also have Navigator, which enabled turn-by-turn routing for field crews. Now, these apps are all great from a certain perspective. Each solves a specific problem, and you can see the pattern of all this field data starting to come together. But now you sort of have the issue where field workers need multiple apps installed, which makes training more complex, and then workflows start to get fragmented when you're working across multiple apps. So now we basically have the classic too many apps problem that we all experience on our phones, where we just have all of our work is fragmented across a bunch of different things. But the good news is that it actually gets slightly worse before it gets better here. So essentially, Esri needed at this time apps that can also support real-time operations. So they, you guessed it, added another layer of apps. So now we have ArcGIS Tracker and Workforce, both fantastic, very useful applications, allowing for tracking of field crews in real time and dispatching jobs to the required locations and technicians, and then monitoring the progress on those field tasks. But like I just mentioned, now we're just adding another layer of apps that organizations have to manage. Everything works, and it works fairly well, but it's not exactly simple. So you can see that all of this fragmentation, or at least some of this fragmentation, not all of this is baked into field maps, but to a certain extent, a lot of this leads to the consolidation product that I'm going to be talking about today, and that's field maps. So field maps takes several earlier apps and then makes them one unified experience. So part of that's the data collection and editing that we had previously in Collector, the location tracking from Tracker, the map viewing and markup from Explorer, and then room for integration with some of these other apps that are still in use today. So as many of these actually do still have uses as independent apps in order to not overly complicate what's available in field maps. So now you see a lot of times organizations can even just deploy a single app if they don't have need of a lot of this ancillary work. So that single app will support most of their field workflows. And so that brings us right back around to the capabilities of field maps. So essentially, the way I explained it before is you're configuring a web map with layer behaviors for your mobile device. And so that includes layers, whether they're editable versus read-only. That includes the forms that you fill out when you're submitting, say, a deficiency or something else that you're collecting in the field. So smart forms, conditional visibility, and the default values that pop up automatically. You also have templates that need to be configured, and then you have to deal with offline areas and sync. Stuff like, and even in some organizations, you have location sharing and tracking settings. So sort of the reason that I'm emphasizing this is tasks is not separate from this. It's configured in the same world. It's map-based configuration on top of layers. So when tasks fails or you can't enable tasks, it's not necessarily that your field maps is broken or is just not working or you're running into a bug. It's usually that the layer that you're trying to put tasks into doesn't meet what the designer expects. So let's talk about what tasks are exactly. Essentially, the main mental model here is that tasks are the built-in work coordination model for field maps. So they allow you to create, assign, execute, monitor, and adjust the work that's being done. And so the mental model here that I want you to keep in mind is sort of tasks are features in a feature layer that appear as actionable to-do lists within field maps. So this means that they can be prioritized into lists like assigned to me or unassigned. That means they're spatial. It means you see the tasks on the map and not just a list. And it means that they're guided. So you can define actions and stages, stuff like start, navigate, complete. And that's the appeal. So tasks can be sort of the bridge between your office dispatch work and your field execution work. That bridge existed before, but it might have been a bit more fragmented, harder to access, more complicated, and things like that. So now let's head on to the thing that breaks it sometimes. But real quick, I'm not sure, Olivia, if you're still having mic trouble. But...
Can you hear me now?
Okay, we can hear you now. Excellent.
Oh, let's go. This is huge. All right, guys. Yes, we can do a demo real quick. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, or we're just going to go and walk through how we can configure field maps or configure tasks in field maps. And let me know when you guys can see that. Can everyone see the gas leak survey field maps pulled up? Yep. Amazing. Okay, so we are just popping into field maps here. We're at a map called Gas Leak Survey. This was made for a utilities company for mobile workers in the field who are looking at gas leaks in their pipelines. And to configure the tasks, we'll go ahead and go to Forms where we can see our map layers here. And when we see leak survey areas, that's our layer that has tasks enabled on it, like Keagan was talking about. We can see that here with this little symbol. So if we click on it here and click on tasks, we can see all of our layouts that are here. These are all of kind of the different views that users will see when they're in the process of completing a task in field maps. And we'll come back to that in a second. But a big thing to configure when you're looking at these is this task settings. We'll go ahead and look at this first, where we have these filters here. We see assigned to me, unassigned, completed. These are the different types of lists of tasks that people can see in task maps. So they can see, or in field maps when they're doing a task, they can see a list of tasks assigned to me, a list of unassigned tasks, a list of completed tasks, and we could also make our own list using expressions here if we made a new filter. When we see task values and task assignee, this is how we configure fields that are in this leak survey areas layer. So these are specific S3 task fields that help us define tasks and give them priority, status, type, or people that they can be assigned to. So for example, if we click the edit pencil here, we can see that we've got different task types here, and these are coded values. So township, annual, these are just different types of tasks that users might have, or assignees. We can see these are all the different possible users who this task can be assigned to. We'll kind of see an example of this in the actual app a little bit later on. But let's go back to these layouts. So these different layouts here, you can see we have unassigned, assigned, in progress, completed, and then we can make other layouts if we want to make our own custom layout. But these are basically what the user will see at different stages in the process when they're using the app. So if no one is assigned to the task, they'll see this layout, which is defined, or it's fleshed out a little bit in the app, but these are basically the buttons that you'll see. We can kind of customize those for the user. If we click pick up, we'll go to the assigned layout. The user will see that. If they click start, they'll go to the in progress layout. They'll see that. And if they click finish, they'll go to the completed layout. So real quick, we can just take a look here at one of the layouts. This is the in progress layout, and we can basically customize what the layout looks like using these elements on the side here that you see. We would drag them into this space here. So right now we have an edit form button, we have a finish button and a status button. If we wanted them to be able to attach a photo of the work that they did or something like that to turn into their manager or their boss, we could add that element here. And basically this entire thing is customizable so that they can complete the task however is needed in field maps. Basically, the big picture here for when we're doing this customization and this configuring in field maps is we're doing all this behind the scenes stuff in order to configure an experience for the user. So the user will see something that looks more like a map with a list of tasks, but here is where we're able to kind of customize what they see, how they can interact, the different capabilities that they have, And it all hinges on this feature layer leak survey areas. So it has to do with the fields that are in leak survey areas and the properties of leak survey areas. Even this form, this is in, we are going to go ahead and cancel. We need to save our work. Even this editing form that's here, this is something that we can interact with in field maps as well. So all of it that we're looking at here really hinges on this one feature layer, like Keagan was talking about, that's task enabled for the map. I'll pass it back to Keagan.
Awesome. Thank you, Olivia. All right. Go back to my presentation real quick. Okay. So like you just saw, this is essentially the main point that I'm going to be harping on for the first part of this presentation. Tasks are just a feature layer, but the schema is particularly picky. So this is sort of the core pain point that we ended up running into quite a bit. They only behave like tasks. The layer will only behave like a tasks layer if the schema is exactly what field maps expects. So conceptually, from Esri docs, that's the screenshot on the left, the non-negotiable fields are task type, task status, assignee, and global ID, and then the coded value domains associated with them. In practice, there are other default fields that need to be inside of your layer in order for field maps to accept it. So the key warning is essentially being almost right is wrong. A field can exist, but if the domain wiring isn't right, tasks will just refuse to enable. Once it does, and once you do manage to get it enabled, what you actually configure is actually pretty intuitive, like Olivia was showing off earlier. So it's forms, layouts, actions, filters, pop-ups, those things. But one of the things that I want you to think about here is that there's no like separate tasks database. It's all just configuration on top of a layer and a map. So the real battle isn't designing these actions. The real battle is getting the layer to a state where designer lets you do any of this. So that leads me into why it matters whether you're in a hosted or referenced feature layer. So just as a quick refresher, I'm sure many of you are already familiar with this, but it's important to make sure that you know what you're working with here. So hosted versus reference matters quite a bit with this because where the data lives drives what designer can do with it. So if you're in a hosted feature layer, the data is stored and managed by ArcGIS Online or your hosting server. This is the easiest to extend from the web UI, and designer can often just add the required task fields automatically. So when you're in a referenced feature service, the data stays in your registered source, and that's usually an enterprise geodatabase of some sort. That's great for system of record patterns and other integration, but some of those schema changes that designer needs require more control. So designer can't modify an enterprise geodatabase schema directly in the way that it can with hosted layers. So with your hosted layers, the platform owns the data and can modify the schema directly. So in other words, designer can't fix things for you when your enterprise geodatabase schema is wrong. So when we're looking at tasks on reference layers, the real work here is fields plus domains have to match what field maps expects. So why would you go referenced at all, you might be wondering? Well, this is because enterprise workflows don't always start and end in a hosted layer. So when tasks live in the enterprise geodatabase, you can treat tasks as a part of your normal system of record. So your assets and work history can all live in the same place. You can integrate with other work order systems that you might be using. You can use the enterprise rules that you might already be familiar with, those domains, subtypes, editor tracking, relationship classes, things like that. And then you can use your normal database tooling for reporting, whatever that might be. The cost of that is that you get this really cool field maps stuff and the tasks on top of it, but it's really picky about the schema. It has to be right. And so now we move on to the problem with today's talk. So these are sort of the gotcha optional fields that I alluded to earlier. So this is basically the why you end up losing 3 days slide, because in practice, the two things are what were commonly blocking tasks on reference layers. So that was either missing the coded value domains on fields like task or type, status, and priority that all have coded value domain wiring, or missing extra expected fields, even if the documentation implies that they're optional. So essentially our experience was you don't need these fields, but also you absolutely do need them. Technically, they're optional according to the docs, but in practice, designer expects the full schema, because what happens is you create the fields, everything looks right, you publish it, you open Designer, and tasks refuse to enable. So Designer does require other fields that are attached to that Esri docs don't always say are optional. So you create the fields, they look right, and then tasks don't enable. So that could either be the domain wiring or your missing fields. So you need to inspect it manually. The unfortunate part is it's not entirely obvious which field is wrong. Everything looks fine until you inspect it carefully. So you'll need to bring this into ArcGIS Pro, open up the schema, and take a look at it. But our fix was, instead of hand building the schema, you can temporarily host it, enable tasks, export features, and then reuse that template, and then copy it out to an enterprise geodatabase and publish it as reference. So this works because enabling tasks on a hosted layer is actually fairly straightforward. So Designer can just generate and configure the schema for you. You don't have to mess around with creating anything yourself. You can just click the button, tasks are already enabled, no problems there. But then you export the features. It preserves all of the important wiring, particularly the domains that I talked about earlier. And then once the enterprise geodatabase has the exact schema, publishing it as referenced is routine, if you're already familiar with it, that is. So that screenshot from Esri documentation calls out 4 essential fields for tasks. And actually, to sort of retroactively clarify what I've said, it is technically correct. Those are the only required fields for tasks. But the gotcha is that Field Maps Designer won't let you enable tasks on a layer that doesn't have all the fields that it expects. So that's a pretty fun distinction. You don't need these, but you do need them. So essentially, we're using the hosted feature layer as a factory for our schema, and then copying the working schema into Enterprise. So now I'll walk through that step by step. Essentially, your first step is just making a layer that you use as your template. This is not long-term. It's the place where we're going to let Field Maps generate our correct task schema for them. So keep it super minimal, create the hosted layer, keep the naming something obvious. Like you can see I have here task_test or task template, something like that. There's no reason to overbuild it at this stage. Your entire criteria for success here is that you just want a hosted layer that Designer has the ability to modify. And then you need to bring it into a map. So tasks are enabled within a map in Field Maps Designer. So once you add that hosted feature layer to a web map, again, keep it minimal. Just make sure that everything's working at this stage. Make sure that the layer is editable, that you can actually open the map in Designer. You can see all the layer forms and everything. And then you flip the switch. So you enable tasks in Field Map Designer. And this is sort of where the magic happens, so to speak. Nothing has to be built out manually. It just all comes together. So you open your map, and then you enable tasks inside of Field Maps Designer. And then it adds and configures the required task schema. All the fields, the coded value domains, it wires everything up so tasks behave like tasks with no errors. And again, sort of reiterating this, you don't want to customize anything heavily at first. You just want to make sure it's working. If tasks enable cleanly at this stage and you can open it without errors, then you're good to go and you can continue on. But if it does fail here on a hosted layer, you've got other problems. You got to maybe go back a couple of steps to make sure you did everything right. Everything downstream from this assumes that this step was done correctly. So just make sure you're not having any problems at this stage. So before you export all of this out, you got to verify that this is all true inside of ArcGIS Pro. So this is the schema that you're going to replicate. This is a horrendously blurry screenshot. I apologize for that. But essentially, this is what you're going to be replicating inside of your enterprise geodatabase. So inspect your fields and domains carefully. Make sure that the required fields all exist, that global ID being present, that's one of the main ones. Make sure that the coded value domains are all attached to the right fields, that being the type field, the assignee field, the status field, and priority field all need to be wired up with coded value domains. And then you want to make sure that also you can see here on the very far right, you can see that there are field types and lengths that need to match expectations as well. The rule is if the domains are missing here, you're definitely not ready to export because that'll just import new errors into your enterprise geodatabase, and then you lose more time or waste more time. So now this last tip here is important because it'll save you from silently losing the domains, which is another problem that we ran into. So you're going to want to use Export Features geoprocessing tool inside of ArcGIS Pro. Now, we're using Export Features because this produces a feature class in a file geodatabase that is yours. And this makes it much more reliable at preserving the task fields and the domain wiring. Now, I really do want to emphasize this here. the fact that you should use export features when you're exporting your geodatabase. There are other methods that you could use, like copy features, but those can silently drop the domains under certain circumstances. And that was an issue that we were running into before. We'd copy the features over and everything would look fine at the first glance. You got all the fields and then tasks won't enable. So we had all the fields right and then totally missed the domains. So if you use export features, it preserves all the fields and domains and you don't have to worry about this. So you won't make our mistake if you try this out in your environment. So export features, treat that like your portable template. And now from here, you're basically home free. You can move the working template into your enterprise, copy the exported feature class into your enterprise geodatabase without changing any of the task fields or domains, at least on the first pass. Your goal here is to just make sure that it's functionally correct. So you publish it as a reference feature service from your ArcGIS server, and then add that reference layer back to your web map. You can do that cleanup later. I'm sure you saw that the domains in that screenshot I showed you are very ugly, and you can't even tell what's happening. But again, functional correctness comes first. Just make sure it's all working before you start worrying about making it look nice. I'm sort of glossing over the step sort of to save time. Maybe a future talk could expand on publishing it out properly. But for now, your goal here is just enterprise has the exact schema that you already proved works in hosted. So now you're going to want to validate this. So in Designer, you confirm that you can open task settings without errors, edit everything, your type statuses and values. So that will mean that your domains are actually being recognized, create your layouts and actions, define those filters that'll become your to-do list later on for crews that are working out in the field. And then in mobile, which is the other end, not the Designer part that you're going to see here in a second, you'll see a tasks panel. You'll see your to-do lists. You'll see filters like assigned to me, and then status-driven actions like start and finish. Those should behave normally without any errors. And then once you get here, the rest feels normal because you're basically just configuring tasks like you're used to, or not in certain cases. But this is essentially the way it's supposed to work, and you're not running into any errors. So that brings me nicely into what it looks like whenever everything is working well. So we've got one last demo for you guys. I'll throw it to Olivia once more to show us how this looks on the mobile end. So Olivia, if you would, please.
Awesome. So yeah, if we're kind of following a workflow here, first we would start with what Keagan explained about getting the task framework all set up, making sure you're successful there. Then we'd go into what I demoed first, which was kind of an intro to what he was going to say about how you're configuring it in field maps. And then now we're going to see the final piece, which I'm going to share my screen here and show the mobile app, which is what the workers would see while they are in the field actually doing the work and using the app. So this is the same map that I showed you before, but now we're looking at it in field maps in the mobile view. And we are going to see here our tasks pop up on the side in this little bar here. So we can see all of our tasks here. Right now they're sorted by distance, but we can see at the top in the search bar, we're looking at the assigned to me list. And when we click on that little hamburger menu there on the right side, we'll see what we saw before, which was our filters or our different lists where we have assigned to me, unassigned, or completed. And those are the different lists of tasks that we can view. And then we can also sort. We can see that there's a sort by where you can sort by distance, type, priority, due date, or status. And those are some of those essential fields that Keagan was talking about when you're setting up the task framework and how you need to include those. And so we're going to choose status here and sort by status. And we'll see that the list sorts where now we see still assigned to me, but now we see our in progress status at the top. And then we've got one of those, and then we have a whole bunch of assigned ones. But we're going to go back and see all of our unassigned tasks. So we're going to click on that because we want to pick up one and we want to start some work. So we're going to click on one here, and we're going to see what a task, I guess, looks like when you first open it in field maps. So we've opened this task. This one's unassigned, and we can see our buttons, the pickup button and the directions buttons. That's what we saw in Field Maps Designer when we were kind of dragging those different elements into the layouts. So this is the unassigned layout, and you can see we've got our pop-up here. Whatever you configure in Map Viewer or Field Maps for your pop-up is what's going to show up in this panel here. So this is an arcade pop-up, but if you had just the standard Esri pop-up, it would also show here in a table. And we're going to go ahead and pick up that task because we want to start. So we'll click Pick Up. And then once we do, we'll see our next layout, which is the assigned layout. So now the layout is assigned to me, and we can click Start if we want to go ahead and start that task. And then we can see now we are in another layout, which is the in progress layout. So we have an edit button at the top, and we have a status button at the top if we need to change the status, if we accidentally started it or assigned it to ourselves and we didn't mean to. And this edit button is going to be for a form, an editing form. And they're going to just enter some information about the survey area and what kind of work they did. And something that's interesting about this, or I guess unique and helpful, is we can also link to a Survey 123 survey. So instead of filling out an editing form, if you want to do a link to Survey 123, you can also enable that. That's a capability of field map tasks, which I think is cool. So we finished that, and now we can see we've got a finish button that popped up at the top. Back in Field Maps Designer, you can actually configure your different buttons and options to have conditional visibility. So for us, we chose that we wanted to wait until they filled out the form about their work before they could finish. So they're going to go ahead and click Finish. And now we're going to see the completed task screen. So the only thing that's left in terms of buttons is if we didn't mean to finish, we can change the status back to in progress. We can go back and do that. But otherwise, we're just going to go ahead and close this task, and we're going to see once again our list of unassigned tasks. And then if we go ahead and go back to that hamburger menu and we click Assign to Me, or I'm sorry, Completed, now we can see all the tasks that are completed, and we can see that our task we just did is at the top. And that's just kind of a quick run through of how someone might use this app. There's definitely a lot of capabilities, a lot of different buttons, a lot of different functionality that you can include in here. But sometimes simpler is better. They're just using this to kind of complete their work in the field and fill out the survey. Again, you saw we could add in pictures or things like that if we needed them to fill out any additional information or include anything else. But this is kind of how it looks on the ground. Once we've done all our configuration, it's this real nice interactive list that people can use over a map. And once again, it's all tied back to that feature layer that we did the configuration on in the first place, all the attributes of that feature layer and the different items, in this case, the different gas leak areas that you see on this map. And that's just kind of how it looks in practice once you've done all the steps that Keagan's been walking us through.
Awesome. Thank you, Olivia. Very helpful. Hopefully that kind of gives you some background into what this actually looks like whenever you deploy it, rather than me just sitting here talking about it conceptually. So thank you very much for that. So real quick, I want to run through some of the troubleshooting steps that I've laid out here when tasks still won't enable, kind of going back to actually making this work functionally. Essentially, here's the checklist before you waste a ton of time trying to chase down rabbit holes that aren't leading you anywhere. Just make sure that those global IDs are in there and that the service exposes it. Make sure that you have all the coded value domains for all of your fields. Make sure there are no typos in those fields. The Esri task field names need to be exact, otherwise you'll get a failure. Make sure that you're dealing with a true feature layer. This is all on the publishing map end. Make sure your service is editable if you expect to be able to create and assign things. And then keep it to one task enabled layer per map is one of the things that Esri often lists as something that you should keep in mind for just best practices reasons, but especially when you're validating it, because it can throw some other things around that might not be helpful for you. So practically speaking, I would say just prove that your hosted template works. So you have the initial feature layer that you host inside of your AGOL or portal environment. You enable tasks, so you make sure that works. Now you prove that the file geodatabase that you export retains the domains. Then you prove that the enterprise geodatabase copy retained all of the domains and fields properly. Then you prove that the reference service exposes them all correctly. So now that kind of takes you through every step of this and keeps you from guessing. So once that works, production is just about basic reliability and governance stuff that I'm sure you guys are bored to death hearing, but it's important, so I'm going to talk about it anyways. I would say treat that task template as like a versioned piece of code, so that way you always have something to fall back on whenever you run into issues. And then don't ever change those existing task fields, because those need to be a specific name. Otherwise, field maps task will run into errors. So make sure those domains are stable so that you're not linking to different places or wiring it up in a way that doesn't function properly. Just make sure it's stable. Make sure you document what each coded value means. Basic stuff that people are probably already familiar with, but I'm going to go over it again. And then decide early on how you're going to version stuff, non-version, traditional, branch versioning, things like that. From a workflow perspective, you should define task types, so stuff that matches actually what you're doing in reality. Try not to make everything other. This is more on the end of configuring field maps in general, not so much the schema and data part of it, but just make sure that tasks are set up properly and that they're matching what you're actually trying to do there. Make your actions obvious, stuff like start, finish, navigate. Use filters to keep those lists short, stuff that's been assigned to me versus due today and high priority. So make sure all that's in there. Make sure that you have a proper way that you're going to go about assigning this to people, so people have the proper permissions for creating, assigning, and completing tasks. You don't want tasks getting closed out before they're done by somebody who didn't understand the full scope of what was happening. So two things that I'd also like to note here. We tested both sync and versioning, and we were able to get tasks working without either. So in our testing, you don't actually need sync or versioning. And not needing versioning is cool because you could theoretically let another system write task updates directly with something like SQL. But make sure you validate in your environment. Some different things and ways that your enterprise is configured can change what's actually feasible. So make sure you validate it in your environment, just a disclaimer. And so now I want to talk about some of the integration stuff that you can theoretically do with tasks. This to me is where it gets really interesting. And sort of as we wrap up here, I just sort of want to talk about some of the things that you could glue your workflow together in a more coherent way. For example, you have the Office dispatch that creates and assigns tasks. And then you could have that happening in custom applications, theoretically. You could have dashboards that track the backlog, stuff that's in progress or already completed. You could automate this stuff. So you could have tasks that generate from triggers when inspections are due, or maybe if you get a sensor alert, some kind of QA flag, or just something that automatically generates a task for somebody to go inspect some whatever asset that you have out there that needs maintenance or an inspection of some sort. And so you could power this via the Python with Workflow Manager, with Esri's Workflow Manager, or Power Automate. So those are places that you could take that. You could also connect this up to your existing work order record, whatever that looks like for you. You can use those domains and subtypes that you have in there in order to keep your values clean across the systems. Some organizations, like I mentioned earlier, do direct SQL updates. But again, that's kind of not exactly something that's necessarily recommended unless you have all of your governance and data security aligned already. So something that's important to note here is that tasks are features. So if something can edit the layer, it can create work theoretically. So this is why it matters whether you're dealing with reference services versus hosted. Those are what make those integrations realistic in those enterprise environments. So I want to wrap up and sort of land this with three major takeaways. Tasks are just features. I've been hammering that home, but the schema has to be exact. So your domains and coded values matter a lot. Domains are sort of a quiet gatekeeper that can keep you out of getting this integration working properly. So for reference services, don't bother hand building the task schema. It just overcomplicates things and makes your life hard and introduces errors. Just let Esri do it for you. Let the designer generate it on a hosted layer, export the features, reuse the template that it gives you. Once tasks enables properly, the rest is workflow design. That's the stuff that Alivia showed off at the beginning. That's fairly easy and you can figure it out, but just make sure that once you get the hard part done, you don't falter on some of the stuff when we're actually configuring tasks. So make sure your types, statuses, actions, filters, permissions, integrations, anything that you want to bring in is done properly. There's no reason to fumble at the finish line. So That's all I've got for you today. I'll leave some of the resources and links that I have up screen on screen. And I think I finished up a little early, so we might have some time to take any questions that you might have. I'm happy to talk through anything that you have. Also, more than willing to read your hate mail that you can direct to kpowers@cultivategeospatial.com if you have anything for me. Alivia, if you have any contact information you want to mention real quick.
Yeah, if you want to ask me about it, send all my hate mail to Keagan, but it would be Gustrosky@cultivategeospatial.com.
So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them now. Otherwise, that is all I have. Yeah, I can drop a copy of this presentation and I also believe it is being recorded if somebody can correct me on that.
I hope it is. I'm not sure.
I know there were some technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Yes, it's being recorded.
Ross, you had a question?
Yeah. First, I'll start with a statement. Keagan, thank you for saying all this. I've been in the trenches like that before, and it can be very frustrating. And no offense, Tyler, you know, the Esri stuff will eventually work, but it sometimes takes effort to massage it and get it the way it needs to be.
No.
Okay, good. I also wanted to confirm the history slide. That first portion was something I also have had to deal with in the past, and you're absolutely right. It too will work. It would work, but it did take some time and effort to process everything. So everything's a lot more efficient these days, and I appreciate that myself. And then my question is, when you had the gas leak survey feature class prior to getting the schema the way it needed to be for tasks to work, was that already in use and in production and integrated with other things? Because if you had to create a copy with the correct schema, did you then lose a bunch of connections to that old feature class?
Alivia, do you want to take this one? I'm not entirely sure if I have a good answer for that.
Yes, so we did use the layer leak survey areas, which had been used before and was currently in use. However, I don't think we really had as much of a problem with breaking connections because we did it in the midst of a big rebuild of a bunch of the apps for our client. So we were already kind of breaking and rebuilding connections and redoing everything. And so it didn't cause a lot of problems for them. But yes, we did have to kind of republish the layer with the new schema and migrate that data over. But we were already doing a big overhaul for them. So it kind of just fit into that pretty easily. But yes, I can foresee that there might be a little bit of a complication if you've got the data currently in use and then you change the schema. That would make sense to me.
Yeah, I just wanted to caution anybody that might mimic that. Yeah, I get it. Because you might have a lot of things already using the old feature class. So although that is a perfect way to fix it, just be aware what you might have to reconnect a lot of things. And it sounds like you guys were in a good position not to have to deal with that. So bravo. But yeah, that's all I got. Thank you guys for the answer.
Yeah, we were already reconnecting everything. So
Cool.
Awesome. Any other questions from the group? No other questions. Sarah, did the recording, do we know if it worked?
It's recording, but I don't know if I got audio. We'll find out at the end.
Hopefully you did, because I'll say Keegan's audio is very crisp. You got the podcaster mic going.
Well, if
Awesome.
nothing else, I have tried to record it too using Camtasia, so we'll see how that works.
Oh, thank you, Trip. Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome.
One of these methods will work, right? Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, you have a
Alright.
third one here. I'm recording the desktop too, so we got a whole bunch of them.
Oh, thank you. Awesome. Yeah. Stefano, if you just want to, if your recording works, just let me know. If you can just send me an email at president@geospatial.org.
Okay.
And then that way we can look into using that as well. So appreciate it.
Yeah. No problem. You're welcome.
Alrighty. Well, any last questions, comments, concerns?
I just want to say what a great group of young professionals here. Amazing work. I'm privileged to work with these folks on a daily basis, and they blow me away every day. If I had the knowledge that they had at that age, there's no telling where I'd go. I might write books or something. Who knows? But great job, guys. Really, really wonderful.
Great job.
thank you, Chip.
Awesome. All right. Well, that concludes our March Lunch and Learn. So stay tuned for the April Lunch and Learn information coming out soon. And we appreciate your time today. Everybody have a good rest of your Tuesday. And thanks again, Keagan and Olivia. Appreciate y'all.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for having us.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.